From the mountain's breath, silence first took shape in song.
The sea remembers every dawn it has ever given.
Beauty lives only in the moment before it fades.
Honor moves not in victory, but in restraint.
Light travels the river of memory, seeking its source. Eternity stands still in the breath between storms.
Words become wings when silence begins to listen.
In each drop of rain, a season learns to bow. To rise is not to flee, but to remember one's roots.
Time breathed through bronze, the voice of countless prayers.
The hands know what the heart forgot to say.
Even falling, the leaf remembers its dance with wind.
Peace blooms not from silence, but from shared stillness.
Hope wears the fragile wings of folded dreams.
Strength is the calm between two thunders.
Even in shadow, warmth remembers the flame.
Grace is not movement, but the silence between.
Fire teaches the blade what endurance truly means.
When the wind passes, stillness finds its shape again.
Purity lies not in coldness, but in quiet resolve.
Reflection reveals the truth motion cannot show.
Between tide and toil, the soul learns humility.
Words are rivers, flowing toward the sea of silence.
The heart endures because it has learned to thaw.
Each light ascends, carrying a wish too tender to speak.
Solitude burns slow, yet warms the quiet heart.
Freedom is the thread that ties us to the wind.
Rebirth whispers softly through petals and light.
Where the sacred meets the sea, the soul bows unseen.
From dawn to dusk, the spirit of a nation breathes eternal. In stone and salt, the breath of gods first lingered.
Flame becomes the bridge between heaven and tide.
The gods hid their faces so mortals could see the light.
Devotion began not with power, but with gratitude.
From the sea's heart, the sun found her voice. Truth revealed itself only to those who knelt in silence. Memory is the color time could never erase.
Grace was the first language of the divine.
From flight came the shape of freedom.
Thus rose the land beneath the rising light.
The land itself exhaled the first prayer. The hands of time moved before the clock was born.
From sharp stone came the will to endure.
Sound carried memory where language could not reach.
Creation was not a moment. It was a dawn that never ended.
Courage was the shadow cast by faith.
Power bowed first before spirit.
The voice of the people became the rhythm of the land.
Nature and faith were never apart. They were one breath.
Fear took form, so courage could recognize itself.
Every heartbeat joined the dance of earth and sky.
Life entered, protected by the dust of ancestors. Abundance was the music of patience. Writing bound the invisible to the living.
The climb itself became the act of prayer.
The gods spoke often in thunder, never in words.
Joy was the oldest form of worship. Even omens are blessings seen from afar.
Each valley carried the echo of beginnings.
Brotherhood rose from the dust of shared silence. A nation was born, not from conquest, but from memory.
Light itself became the first architecture.
Ocean was the song of freedom, learning to speak. Civilization began where shadows learned to glow.
Fire forged devotion into form.
The heavens answered only with color.
The future begins each night in the rhythm of a mother's breath.
Spirit rises endlessly, like prayer without sound.
Between sea and shrine, eternity found its name.
Connection was the quiet art of faith made visible.
Peace returns each dawn to those who listen.
Geography became destiny, shaped by tide and trust.
The stars were read as notes in the song of creation.
Purity descended quietly, whitening even the noise of time. To build was to remember the weight of earth. Authority was born from the act of writing light.
Then, art became their scripture when words were still unborn.
The voice of the empire rose from the silence of belief.
Even in triumph, nature wrote its own farewell. He ruled not with thunder, but with stillness.
The faith of many became one sky.
The rising sun became both mirror and vow.
After every storm, the mountain remembers peace.
The earth glowed, as if memory itself were fire. Words were petals, carried by the breath of time.
Reflection doubled the light, not the illusion.
The end of prayer was never silence. It was rest.
Day bowed to dusk, carrying faith into dream.
Thus began Yamato, the soul of Japan, in the voice of dawn.
In silence, the warrior learned that discipline was a prayer.
Humility was the first strike of wisdom.
In fire, spirit took the shape of patience.
Words became armor for the soul.
Beauty guarded the edge of every blade. The echo taught the heart to wait. To conquer the self was the first victory.
Precision was devotion, shaped by air.
Even courage feared its own reflection.
Faith was written in strokes of breath. The world spoke softly to those who listened.
Purity is not peace. It is purpose.
Voices joined like rivers flowing towards stillness.
Reflection reminded him of what must not be lost.
Grace was the balance between restraint and flight.
Even conflict can sing when met with awareness.
Sorrow is the shadow that guards loyalty.
Devotion endures where walls cannot.
Heaven reminded the proud that even stone can break.
Between blade and faith, the soul found balance.
Duty was the lantern, carried through endless night.
Even beauty served the quiet law of respect. Reflection was the purest form of prayer.
The blade listened more than it spoke.
War arrived not as anger, but as duty's consequence.
Even fury carried the shape of grace.
Compassion tempers steel more deeply than flame.
Vigilance is the peace that never sleeps.
Words were his final armor against forgetting.
Ashes remember what flames no longer can.
To bow was to rise inwardly.
Freedom often arrives wearing the color of sacrifice.
Exile was the cost of unbroken honor.
Strength ends where surrender begins.
Each flame carried a name, whispered to the wind.
Peace begins where lineage remembers mercy.
Shadows were the ink of history.
Legacy waits quietly when men are gone.
Beauty survives, even when the blade is sheathed.
The storm outside echoed the calm.
Stillness became their final form of wisdom.
Simplicity was the ritual of the present.
Balance breathes between heat and restraint.
Renewal enters quietly, without permission. Life and discipline grew from the same root. Faith took form in the patience of waiting. Light travels farther when freed of purpose. Reflection taught steel the meaning of surrender. Freedom bowed to stillness, not to fear. In nothingness, everything returns home. The night glowed with lives too brief to forget.
Eternity was not the mountain, but the gaze that endured.
Memory rose like flame returning to heaven.
Peace does not end, it withdraws.
Faith whispers softly through the breath of rest.
Even exile becomes a mirror when the heart is still.
Winter was the season when silence learned to speak.
Ending was only another form of devotion.
The soul awakens only after surrender.
From faith and discipline, Japan found its still heart. Civilization begins where light chooses to linger. The hum of daily life was the music of peace.
Color became the prayer of those who no longer fought.
Art captured what time allowed to slip away.
Beauty learned to walk between shadow and sun.
In a cup of tea, the world found its stillness. Every groove held the memory of patience.
They said it was restlessness, but this is rhythm. We carry the fate of the kingdom on these roads.
Prosperity was the quiet child of order.
Peace was a landscape painted in light.
Harmony began with the simplest gesture.
Form was nothing without reflection.
Words were the mirrors of a fleeting moment.
This is the sound of true craftsmanship, sculpted into clarity. A memory shaped by hand.
Grace became their rebellion against time. Architecture rose from prayer into proportion.
Perfection was the courage to stop.
Even rain rehearsed the rhythm of serenity.
Joy returned as the echo of understanding.
Thus Edo shone, where art became the light of the common soul.
Fire forged the empire, but shadows taught them peace.
From sweat and flame, the new gods of progress were born.
Wires carried voices faster than prayer.
Tradition bowed to the march of steam.
The sea once mirrored faith. Now it reflected ambition.
Power wore the face of renewal.
Beauty and progress argued in silence.
Empires grew in the shadow of their victories.
War touched even those who prayed for dawn.
Modernity arrived, dressed as order.
Roads of iron replaced paths of faith.
Pride blurred the line between devotion and desire.
The future was taught to stand in formation.
Beauty endured even beneath command.
Faith became calculation, and progress a kind of prayer.
The night surrendered its stars to glass.
Every departure carried a piece of silence with it. The empire walked in step with its own echo.
Even glory feared the sound of its own storm.
Progress burned brighter than memory.
Resistance began with the courage to remain quiet.
Factories hum like temples of steel. Humanity prayed to machines and called it destiny.
Empires forget, but mothers remember.
Conquest lit the horizon and dimmed the heart. Triumph spoke softly. It had nothing left to prove.
Every empire is measured by the silence that follows. Pride and loss shared the same wind.
Innocence returns where history sleeps.
Faith endured, even in the echo of war.
Progress awakens slowly, like a nation learning to breathe.
Progress rose like incense from iron and fire.
Creation and destruction shared the same heat.
The sea learned a new kind of thunder.
The machine became the voice of destiny.
Tradition turned into memory behind glass. Silence learned to speak in code.
Even nature watched the birth of power.
Home became the front line of devotion.
Belief prepared the body for sacrifice.
The sky no longer belonged to peace.
Every hammer echoed the Empire's heartbeat.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America.
Patriotism was taught before speech.
Faith became spectacle.
Heaven listened, but did not interfere. The sea was their mirror and their grave. Memory posed for eternity.
Light itself became a weapon.
Darkness learned to count its own stars.
Propaganda fed them before bread.
The age of fire had no dawn left.
The sea burned for a second sun.
Devotion and despair became one. Even faith borrowed light from war. Mercy worked quietly beside ruin. Nature recorded every sin in color.
Innocence copied the noise of power.
Progress forgot how to rest.
History moved faster than footprints.
Victory looked indistinguishable from loss.
Symbols outlive their meanings.
The cost was counted in echoes.
Even love turned to ash.
Beauty watched from a distance. Sound survived what sight could not.
The city burned until light itself wept.
Humanity became its own rescue. Faith learned fragility. Defeat taught him to see.
To all remaining units, the fight is over. We accept the terms of surrender. God help us all.
The nation listened with its heart broken.
Honor learned to bow.
History rewrote itself in gray. The sun fell and rose in the same second.
Hope began, small enough to hold.
Compassion fed the soul before the body.
Hands remembered how to begin again.
Faith was reborn in ember.
Light became their way to speak with the past.
Color restored what fire had taken.
Life returned through earth, not iron. Knowledge awaited forgiveness.
Peace arrived, unannounced.
Spring remembered how to return. The word itself became a rebirth.
Sound bridged what light could not.
Motion found its innocence.
Peace was learned through mourning. The night was gentle again.
From fire and shadow, Japan found its reflection in light.
Through ashes and rain, compassion returned.
Civilization melted faster than mercy.
Fear became the only language left.
Even faith burns when silence forgets. Mourning was the work of every survivor.
Grief is a garden no empire can conquer.
The storm wept for those who could not.
Hope learned to whisper through debris. Even beauty wore ashes that year.
Compassion was the last discipline left unbroken.
The sea remembered each name it carried.
Faith returned as breath, not doctrine.
Even silence has a face.
Memory glowed where life could not. Light remembered, even when the hands that made it were gone.
Innocence began again in small acts of thirst. Hope folded itself into wings. Life persisted, stubborn as breath.
Sound was rebirth before sight returned.
The dawn forgave what memory could not.
Grief remembered by touch what words could not.
Even faith needed warmth to survive.
Memory became landscape.
Mourning was the quietest form of hope.
Water learned to cleanse what fire forgot.
Dignity returned through humility.
The future listened through the eyes of the young.
Even ruins learn to dream.
Time forgave before men did. Knowledge rose from ashes like a prayer.
Earth never refused redemption.
Peace took its first flight.
Honored what it could not undo.
Heaven still mirrored the earth. Light returned to trace the path of memory. Ordinary life became sacred.
Respect rebuilt what walls could not.
Spring dared to trust again.
Connection survived the flood of time.
Peace began as apology.
Knowledge rose like seedlings from ash. Art rebuilt what stone could not.
Joy was the first act of forgiveness.
Sound filled the absence with grace. Memory found peace by learning to drift.
Words healed what silence could not.
Light became prayer without words.
Forgiveness sounded like morning.
Memory rooted itself in blossoms.
Renewal was never sudden. It was kind.
The horizon no longer frightened her.
Motion returned without fear.
The past learned to coexist, not to vanish. Words once born of pain now carried hope. The gods had never left. They were waiting.
Beauty forgave history.
Peace was learned through play.
Civilization glowed softly again, humbled by memory.
Harmony returned one note at a time.
Every light carried the name of someone loved.
Repair was the art of remembrance. Home returned, not as place, but as peace.
The soul learned to write again.
They gave roots to the promise their elders whispered.
Prayer returned as scent, not sound.
Joy required courage to remember.
Purity was found in persistence.
Even broken streets could mirror heaven.
Strength bowed before tenderness.
Peace began in the patience of small hands.
Nature forgave what mankind confessed.
Movement no longer meant conquest.
Gratitude replaced victory.
Water forgot nothing, but forgave everything.
Cities dream themselves back into light.
Peace finally learned to fly.
Memory was love, refusing to fade.
Even eternity changed color after sorrow. Through ashes and rain, compassion returned.
Neonan Sakura, the heart beats again.
The city breathed light.
before sound. Order danced within chaos.
Look at what we've created. The new canvas is the city itself.
The future wears petals instead of armor.
Even glass remembers the warmth of flame.
Motion became meditation in steel. Motion became meditation in steel.
Technology bowed quietly to routine.
Tradition adapted. It never died.
Innovation was the new form of prayer.
Motion no longer meant escape, but return.
The city learned how to breathe again.
Freedom wore the scent of spring.
Even light learned humility after darkness.
Ancient strings tuned to new hearts.
Precision became the modern form of prayer.
The past became an art of remembrance.
Warmth returned through shared taste.
Speed found serenity when guided by purpose.
Light no longer conquered, it connected.
Technology carried tradition on invisible wings.
Wonder survived through new eyes.
Faith adapted, but never faded.
Creation learned the language of code.
The rain washes everything clean, and in the quiet aftermath, even these reflections find their rhythm in renewal.
Pride returned, softened by humility.
Progress bowed to the wisdom of earth.
Harmony replaced conquest.
Beauty evolved, but still remembered silence.
Stillness endured, even amid progress.
Perfection learned to breathe in code.
Architects designed temples of glass and air. Faith evolved, yet remained transparent.
The past sang softly through neon.
Nature returned through design. Memory floated peacefully between buildings.
Modern faith wore the face of kindness.
Storytelling became their second rebirth. The future bowed to remembrance.
Beauty adapted to survive.
Heritage continued through stillness.
Wind carried both laughter and history.
Joy learned again to rise without guilt.
Peace was the rhythm of routine.
Compassion evolved with circuitry.
Old spirits returned through new light.
Memory became portable, yet sacred.
Simplicity outlived spectacle. Power rediscovered humility in air. Past and present finally kept time together.
City and sky, two mirrors, one soul. The future no longer raced ahead. It arrived in harmony.
Creation was no longer for glory, but for joy.
Simplicity returned as luxury of the soul.
Patience shaped what time could not. The city became an organism of quiet wonder.
Old songs found new echoes underground.
Tradition and technology finally bowed to each other.
Art remembered its origin in observation.
Light belonged to everyone now.
Peace was not silence, but balance in motion.
They see what we've forgotten. That beauty became light itself.
Unity returned through sound, not silence.
Language found its reflection in light.
Stillness endured even amid progress. Connection was the empire reborn in kindness.
Faith learned to fly.
Peace rests on the breath of water.
The mountain remained unchanged, yet understood anew.
Renewal was not invention, but remembrance.
Gratitude outlasts every era. Humanity returned to its reflection. Freedom felt like spring.
The sea carried the rhythm of peace.
Every generation folds hope again.
To see without judging, that was enlightenment.
Light never truly disappears. It migrates. The world turned, but Japan kept its soul.
Morning became the nation's memory. Islands became prayers on the surface of the sea.
The future awaited, quiet and bright.
And in the dawn beyond the sea, memory becomes light.
Where reflection ends, eternity begins.
Time drifted, leaving only beauty behind.
Faith was never lost, only quiet. Innocence is the language of peace.
Hope ascended, remembering its origin. Creation repeats itself through remembrance.
All boundaries dissolve beneath the breath of light. The spirit found its flight again.
Peace was not destination, but continuation.
One flame is enough to recall the sun.
Gratitude was the last empire to fall.
Motion was the heartbeat of eternity.
The islands of dawn still breathe.
Memory hums through silence forever.
Beauty endures in every repetition of light.
We become what we remember.
Letting go was the purest form of keeping. Life begins again where it once ended.
The mountain stands, not as witness, but as promise.
Light spills across cities and temples alike. No boundary between sacred and ordinary remained.
The sea carries every memory home.
All stories end in light.
Time itself bows before illumination.
Silence was the sound of peace fulfilled.
Nothing ends. Everything transforms.
Beauty returns, endlessly reborn.
Memory became light, and light became memory.
All moments drift toward the same horizon of light.
What was once divided now breathes as one.
The present is only the past remembering itself.
We are reflections within reflections.
Every prayer becomes light when released.
Unity was not built, it was remembered.
Light touches all without choosing.
The land of dawn still breathes beneath the stars.
Memory became light, and light became memory.
Empires fade, but the light of harmony endures in Japan.